The Iron Lady roared up the main approach to Hill 847 like an unstoppable force of nature. Her 70 tons of armor and firepower focused on one objective: reaching the trapped SEAL team before they were overrun. The insurgent forces had positioned themselves in a classic ambush formation, using the natural terrain to create overlapping fields of fire that would normally devastate any ground force attempting to advance. But they had never faced an M1A2 Abrams tank in full attack mode. Torres fired the main gun at point-blank range into a cluster of rocks where at least 6 insurgents had taken cover. The high-explosive round detonated with tremendous force, sending rocks and debris flying in all directions. The blast was so close that the tank's crew felt the concussion even inside their armored compartment. "Splash 1 fighting position," Torres reported, already traversing to engage the next target. RPGs began streaking toward the tank from multiple directions as the insurgents realized their ambush was collapsing. Most of the rocket-propelled grenades missed their rapidly moving target, but 2 struck the tank's side armor with tremendous impacts that rang through the crew compartment like hammer blows on an anvil. "We're hit but no penetration," Kim reported, checking damage indicators while loading another main gun round. The advanced armor systems of the Abrams had done their job, deflecting the RPG warheads without allowing them to penetrate the crew compartment. But Sarah knew their luck wouldn't hold forever if they remained exposed to multiple RPG teams. "Johnson, get us hull down behind that ridgeline at 2 o'clock, she ordered, pointing toward a natural terrain feature that would provide some protection. But first they had to break through the main insurgent force that stood between them and the SEAL team. Sarah could see the enemy fighters clearly now through her vision blocks, some of them so close she could make out individual faces as they aimed their weapons at her tank. Torres was firing continuously, alternating between main gun rounds and machine gun bursts as targets presented themselves. Each 120mm shell eliminated entire fighting positions, while the coaxial machine gun swept areas where insurgents were attempting to move between cover. The psychological effect of the tank's assault was becoming apparent. Some insurgent fighters were beginning to retreat, abandoning their positions as the massive armored vehicle crushed everything in its path. Others continued fighting with desperate courage, knowing that retreat across open ground would make them easy targets for the tank's weapon systems. Sarah grabbed the radio to check on the SEAL team. "Neptune 6, Iron Lady. What's your status?" Harrison's voice came back immediately. "Iron Lady, pressure on our position has decreased significantly. Most of the hostiles attacking us have shifted to engage you. We can see your position and are ready to provide covering fire." "Neptune 6, can you identify any remaining threats to our flanks or rear?" "Affirmative, Iron Lady. Viper 1 reports 2 RPG teams moving to positions on your left flank, approximately 300 meters southeast of your current position." Sarah relayed the information to Torres, who was already scanning in that direction through his thermal sight. The advanced fire control system quickly identified the targets and calculated a firing solution. "Targets acquired," Torres announced. "Request permission to engage with main gun." "Engage," Sarah ordered. The 120mm gun fired again, the round impacting directly between the 2 RPG teams and eliminating both threats simultaneously. The explosion echoed off the surrounding hills, and Sarah could see additional insurgent fighters breaking contact and retreating toward higher ground. But the tactical situation was far from over. Intelligence reports had indicated at least 30 insurgents in the area, and Sarah estimated they had engaged fewer than half that number so far. The remaining fighters were likely repositioning for a coordinated counterattack. Johnson had maneuvered the tank to a hull-down position behind a natural ridge, exposing only the turret and main gun while protecting the more vulnerable lower hull from RPG fire. From this position, Torres had excellent fields of fire while minimizing the tank's exposure to enemy weapons. "Neptune 6, Iron Lady," Sarah called on the radio. "We're in position to provide covering fire. Can you move to a better defensive position?" Harrison's response revealed the full extent of their situation. "Negative, Iron Lady. We have 2 wounded who cannot move under their own power. We're going to need medical evacuation and cannot relocate without assistance." Sarah realized that simply driving off the attacking force would not be sufficient. The SEAL team needed direct physical assistance to extract their wounded teammates, which meant someone would have to leave the protection of the tank's armor. She keyed the internal communications. "Gentlemen, the SEALs have wounded who can't move. We're going to need to provide direct assistance." Torres looked up from his gun sight. "Ma'am, that means exposing ourselves outside the tank." "I know," Sarah replied. "But we didn't come this far to leave wounded Americans on a mountainside." Kim spoke up from his loader's position. "Lieutenant, what if we move the tank closer to their position? We could provide direct cover while they load their wounded." Sarah considered the suggestion. Moving closer would put the tank at greater risk from remaining RPG teams, but it would also allow them to provide maximum protection for the extraction process. Before she could respond, Harrison's voice cut through the radio static. All stations, Neptune 6. We have movement on the high ground to the north. Large number of hostiles approaching from grid 42S MD 12350-67900. Estimate 40 to 50 additional fighters moving to surround both our positions." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The initial insurgent force had been reinforced, probably by fighters, from other cells who had heard the battle and moved to support their comrades. The tactical situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. She quickly switched to the base command frequency, hoping to re-establish communications. "Chapman Base, Iron Lady. We are engaged with large hostile force at Hill 847. Request immediate air support and medical evacuation for wounded friendly personnel." The response came back immediately, but it wasn't what she wanted to hear. "Iron Lady, your position is noted. Air support is still unavailable due to weather conditions. Ground reinforcement is en route, but will not arrive for 45 minutes. 45 minutes might as well be 45 hours. Sarah looked at her tactical display, calculating distances and ammunition supplies. They had enough main gun rounds and machine gun ammunition to continue fighting, but they were now facing odds of at least 10 to 1 against an enemy force that knew the terrain intimately. Torres was tracking the new threat through his thermal sight. "Lieutenant, I count at least 30 new contacts moving down from the high ground. They're trying to get above us and the SEAL team." Sarah made another command decision. "Johnson, move us up the hill toward Neptune 6's position. We're going to extract those wounded SEALs and fight our way out of here together." The tank lurched forward, leaving the protection of the ridge line and beginning its advance up the rocky slope toward the trapped SEAL team. Every member of the crew knew they were now committed to a desperate rescue mission against overwhelming odds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez adjusted her helmet and checked her equipment one final time. The 25-year-old tank commander had been deployed for 8 months, leading her M1A2 Abrams crew through countless missions in this unforgiving landscape. Today felt different, though. The radio chatter had been unusually heavy since dawn, and intelligence reports suggested increased insurgent activity in their sector. Sarah's tank, nicknamed Iron Lady by her crew, sat positioned at forward operating Base Chapman, its 120mm main gun pointing toward the horizon. Her crew consisted of 3 seasoned soldiers, Sergeant Mike Torres on the gun, Corporal Danny Kim as the loader, and Private First Class Alex Johnson as the driver. They had been together for 6 months and moved like a well-oiled machine. The base commander, Colonel Williams, had briefed all armor units that morning about a special operations team conducting a reconnaissance mission approximately 15 miles northeast of their position. The Navy SEALs were gathering intelligence on a suspected weapons cache hidden in the mountainous region. It was supposed to be a routine surveillance operation, in and out within 12 hours. Sarah remembered the SEAL team leader, Lieutenant Commander James Hawk Harrison, from their brief meeting the night before. The tall, weathered operator had approached her tank during evening maintenance, asking about response times and extraction protocols. There was something in his eyes that suggested he expected trouble, even though he spoke with the casual confidence typical of special operations personnel. The radio crackled to life around 800 hours. Sarah grabbed the handset as Torres continued, running diagnostics on the main gun systems. The voice belonged to their forward observer, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, stationed at an observation post 3 miles to the north. "Iron Lady, This is Overwatch. We're picking up unusual movement in grid square 42 SMD 12345678890. Multiple heat signatures, approximately 20 to 30 individuals moving in coordinated patterns toward the SEAL team's last known position. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The coordinates placed the movement directly between the SEALs and their planned extraction point. She immediately switched to the command frequency to report to base operations, while Torres began powering up all combat systems. Colonel Williams's voice came through clearly. Iron Lady, maintain current position and monitor the situation. We have air support en route, ETA 20 minutes. Do not advance without direct authorization. But 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours if the SEALs were walking into an ambush. Sarah had studied enough after-action reports to know that special operations teams, despite their exceptional training, could be overwhelmed by superior numbers and unfavorable terrain. The mountains provided perfect cover for insurgent forces, while limiting options for extraction. Torres noticed her expression and raised an eyebrow. Problem, Lieutenant? Maybe, Sarah replied, continuing to monitor multiple radio frequencies. Keep everyone ready. I have a feeling we might be needed sooner than expected. The next hour passed slowly, with periodic updates from various observation posts tracking the convergence of insurgent forces toward the SEAL team's area of operation. Sarah plotted their movements on her tactical map, noting how the enemy seemed to be setting up a classic encirclement pattern. They were being methodical, professional, suggesting this wasn't a random encounter but a planned operation. At 09:47 hours, everything changed. The radio erupted with urgent transmissions from the SEAL team's communications operator. Static mixed with the sound of automatic weapons fire made the transmission difficult to understand, but certain words came through clearly. Heavy contact, surrounded, casualties, need immediate extraction. Sarah's crew instantly snapped to full alert. Johnson fired up the engine while Kim loaded a high-explosive round into the main gun. Torres was already scanning through his thermal sights, trying to identify targets at maximum range. The SEAL team's situation deteriorated rapidly over the next 15 minutes. Despite their superior training and equipment, they were outnumbered, at least 5-1, and trapped in terrain that favored the enemy. The promised air support was delayed due to weather conditions at the airfield, and the nearest ground units were over an hour away. Colonel Williams came on the radio. All units, maintain positions. We are working on alternative extraction methods. But Sarah could hear the desperation creeping into the SEAL team's transmissions. They were running low on ammunition, had at least 2 wounded team members, and were being forced into an increasingly smaller defensive perimeter. The insurgents were taking their time, knowing they had the advantage. Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice cut through the static. Any station. This is Neptune 6. We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Request immediate. Assistance over. Sarah looked at her map one more time, calculating distances and travel times. The SEALs were 12 miles away across difficult terrain, but the Iron Lady could make that distance in under 20 minutes if they pushed hard. She thought about the rules of engagement, the chain of command, and the potential consequences of acting without direct orders. Then she thought about 6 American warriors trapped on a mountainside, fighting for their lives against impossible odds. Torres was watching her carefully. What are your orders, Lieutenant? Sarah grabbed the radio handset and switched to the command frequency. Her voice was calm but determined. Chapman Base, this is Iron Lady. Request permission to advance to grid 42 SMD 12345678890 to provide immediate fire support for Neptune 6. The response came quickly. Iron Lady, negative. Maintain current position until air support arrives. Sarah stared at the radio for a long moment, listening to the continuing firefight playing out over the SEAL team's frequency. She could hear Harrison coordinating his team's defense, his voice growing more strained with each transmission. The decision that would change everything was about to be made. Sarah Martinez stared at the radio handset in her grip, the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. The sounds of desperate fighting continued to pour through the SEAL team's frequency, punctuated by explosions and the distinctive crack of sniper rifles. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to act, to save those men fighting for their lives 12 miles away. Johnson, how long to reach their position if we go full throttle? She asked her driver. 18 minutes, ma'am. Maybe less if we take the direct route through the valley, came the immediate response. Private First Class Alex Johnson had already been studying the terrain, anticipating the order that might come. Torres adjusted his headset and looked through the gunner's primary sight. Lieutenant, I can already see muzzle flashes on the thermal scope. Those boys are in serious trouble. Sarah switched back to the SEAL team's frequency. Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice had grown more urgent. Neptune 6 to any station. We have multiple casualties and are down to our last magazines. Enemy forces are closing from all sides. If anyone can hear this, we need help now. The cue. Professional calm in Harrison's voice couldn't completely mask the desperation of their situation. Sarah had trained with SEAL teams before, and knew that for Harrison to openly admit they were in serious trouble meant the situation was beyond critical. Corporal Kim, the loader, spoke up from his position. Ma'am, those are our guys out there. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of military brotherhood, the unspoken promise that no American soldier would be left behind. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing the same determination in their eyes that she felt in her heart. Chapman Base, Iron Lady. She called again on the command frequency. SEAL team is taking heavy casualties and requesting immediate assistance. We can be there in 18 minutes. Colonel Williams's voice was firm. Iron Lady, you are ordered to maintain position. Air support is en route. Do not advance without direct authorization. Acknowledge. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about her career, her family, and the oath she had taken as an officer. Then she thought about 6 Americans dying on a mountainside while she sat safely behind her base's walls. Iron Lady acknowledges, she said into the radio, then immediately switched to her crew's internal communication system. Gentlemen, we're going to help those SEALs. Anyone who wants to object can do so now. The response was immediate and unanimous. Let's go get our boys, Torres said, speaking for all of them. Sarah keyed the command frequency one last time. Chapman Base, Iron Lady is experiencing radio difficulties. We are conducting a routine patrol to investigate suspected insurgent activity in our sector. Before anyone could respond, she switched off the command radio and nodded to Johnson. Take us out, Alex. Fast and quiet until we clear the base perimeter. The 70-ton Abrams tank rolled out of its defensive position with surprising stealth, its turbine engine producing less noise than most people expected. Johnson navigated through the base's exit checkpoint with practiced ease, showing the duty officer their patrol orders from the previous day. Once they cleared the outer perimeter, Sarah gave the order they had all been waiting for. Johnson, punch it. We have Americans in trouble. The tank's turbine engine roared to life at full power, propelling the massive machine across the Afghan landscape at nearly 40 miles per hour. The crew was thrown back in their seats as Johnson pushed the Iron Lady to her limits, navigating rocks, ravines, and scattered vegetation with the skill of a professional race car driver. Sarah monitored the SEAL team's frequency continuously as they raced toward the sound of battle. The radio chatter painted a grim picture. Harrison's team had been forced into an even smaller defensive perimeter, using rocky outcroppings and a few scraggly trees for cover. They were surrounded on 3 sides with their backs against a steep cliff face. Neptune 6, this is Viper 1, came Harrison's voice, addressing his sniper. How many rounds do you have left? 6 rounds plus my sidearm, came the terse reply. Sarah did quick calculations in her head. At their current speed, they would reach the battle area in 12 minutes. The question was whether the SEALs could hold out that long. The terrain grew more challenging as they approached the foothills, forcing Johnson to reduce speed slightly to maintain control. The tank's suspension system absorbed most of the impact from rocks and small ravines, but the crew still felt every major bump and turn. Torres was constantly scanning through his sights, looking for any sign of the enemy force they knew was ahead. At 8 miles from the target area, he spotted the first heat signatures. Lieutenant, I've got multiple contacts bearing 020 degrees, range 4,500 meters, he reported calmly. Sarah grabbed her binoculars and studied the area Torres had identified. Through the thermal scope display, she could see at least 20 figures moving in coordinated groups up the mountainside toward a cluster of heat signatures that had to be the SEAL team. "Can you get a shot from here?" she asked. "Affirmative, ma'am. High explosive should scatter them nicely." But Sarah hesitated. Firing at this range meant announcing their presence to every insurgent in the valley. The element of surprise would be lost, and the enemy would have time to reposition or potentially harm the SEALs before the tank could close the distance. The radio crackled again. Any station. This is Neptune 6. We are down to small arms ammunition only. Enemy forces are approximately 50 meters from our position. This may be our last transmission." The resignation in Harrison's voice told Sarah everything she needed to know. The SEALs were preparing for their final stand. She made another command. Decision. "Torres, put one round right in the middle of that advancing group. High explosive." "Roger, ma'am." "Target acquired. Range 4,800 meters." The main gun elevated slightly as Torres made final adjustments for range and wind. Sarah grabbed her headset to warn the SEAL team. "Neptune 6, this is Iron Lady. Incoming friendly fire support, 30 seconds, keep your heads down." There was a moment of stunned silence before Harrison's voice came back, filled with disbelief and hope. "Iron Lady, say again your last transmission." "Neptune 6 cavalry is en route. Hold your position." Torres announced his readiness. "On target, ready to fire." Sarah took one last look at the tactical situation, said a quick prayer, and gave the order that would announce their arrival to everyone within miles. Fire. The 120mm main gun erupted with a thunderous roar that echoed across the valley like the voice of an angry god. The high explosive round screamed through the morning air at nearly 3,000 feet per second, covering the distance to its target in less than 2 seconds. Through his thermal sight, Torres watched the shell impact directly in the center of the advancing insurgent group. The explosion was devastating, creating a fireball that could be seen for miles and sending shockwaves through the rocky terrain. Bodies and equipment were scattered in all directions, and the coordinated advance immediately dissolved into chaos. "Direct hit," Torres reported with professional satisfaction. "Multiple casualties, enemy formation disrupted." But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The single shot had announced their presence to every hostile force in the region, and she could already see other groups of fighters turning their attention toward the approaching tank. "Johnson, continue advance at maximum speed," she ordered. "Kim, load another HE round. Torres, start picking targets of opportunity." The Iron Lady continued its thunderous charge across the landscape, now with all pretense of stealth abandoned. Johnson navigated around larger obstacles while maintaining dangerous speed over the rough terrain. The tank's advanced stabilization system allowed Torres to maintain target acquisition even while bouncing across rocks and ravines. On the SEAL team's frequency, Sarah could hear a dramatic change in Harrison's voice. The resignation was gone, replaced by renewed determination and tactical focus. "Neptune 6 to all stations, friendly armor support is inbound. Viper 1, can you spot their position?" "Affirmative, Neptune 6, big beautiful tank coming up the valley at about 6 miles out. Looks like an Abrams." Sarah keyed her radio. "Neptune 6, Iron Lady. What's your exact position and can you mark targets?" Harrison's response was immediate. "Iron Lady, we're on the north face of Hill 847, about 200 meters up from the valley floor. We have 3 groups of hostiles. One group of 8 to 10 directly to our east, another 12 to 15 southeast, and a larger group of 20, plus coming up the main approach from the south." Sarah studied her tactical display and relayed the information to her crew. Torres was already identifying targets through his advanced fire control system, which could track multiple threats simultaneously. "Neptune 6, can you use smoke or other markers to identify your exact position?" Sarah asked. "Negative on smoke, Iron Lady. We're down to essential equipment only, but Viper 1 has a signal mirror and can flash your direction." Through her commander's periscope, Sarah caught a brief flash of reflected sunlight from the hillside. She now had a precise fix on the SEAL team's location and could coordinate effective fire support. The tank was now within 3 miles of the battle, and small arms fire began pinging off its armor. The insurgents were using everything they had: AK-47 assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and at least one heavy machine gun that Torres quickly identified and eliminated with a precisely placed main gun round. "Johnson, swing us around. To approach from the southwest. That'll put the main hostile group between us and the SEALs," Sarah directed. The tactical situation was becoming clearer as they closed distance. The insurgents had been caught completely off guard by the tanks' arrival, and were now trying to reposition their forces to deal with this unexpected threat. Some groups were attempting to flank the Abrams, while others continued pressing their attack on the trapped SEAL team. Sarah realized she was facing a classic tactical dilemma. If she focused on the groups attacking the SEALs, other insurgent forces could potentially disable her tank with RPGs or improvised explosive devices. But if she dealt with the flanking threats first, the SEALs might be overrun before she could help them. The decision was made for her when Torres spotted an insurgent with an RPG taking aim at their right side. The gunner traversed quickly and fired a burst from the coaxial machine gun, eliminating the threat before it could launch. "Lieutenant, we've got hostiles moving to surround us," Kim reported from his position. "Multiple RPG teams trying to get flanking shots." Sarah grabbed the radio. "Neptune 6, we're taking fire from multiple positions. Can your sniper provide overwatch on our flanks?" "Affirmative, Iron Lady. Viper 1 has eyes on 2 RPG teams moving to your 3 o'clock position." The distinctive crack of a sniper rifle echoed across the valley, followed immediately by Harrison's confirmation. "1 RPG team down, working on the second." Sarah felt a surge of appreciation for the SEAL team's professionalism. Even while trapped, and low on ammunition, they were providing crucial support for their rescuers. The tank was now within 1 mile of the hill, and Sarah could see the battle unfolding through her vision blocks. Muzzle flashes sparkled from various positions on the hillside, and she could make out individual insurgents moving between rocks and sparse vegetation. Torres had switched to the tank's secondary weapon systems, using the coaxial machine gun, and Commander's weapon station to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The 50 caliber rounds were devastating against personnel in light cover, and the psychological effect of the tank's presence was already causing some insurgent groups to break and retreat. But the largest group of fighters was still pressing their attack on the SEAL position, apparently determined to eliminate the American Special Operations Team before the tank could intervene effectively. "Neptune 6, what's your ammunition status?" Sarah asked. "Iron Lady, we're down to individual magazines and grenades. Maybe 5 minutes of defensive fire if they push hard." Sarah looked at her tactical display one more time. They were 800 meters from the hill, close enough for maximum effectiveness but still far enough away that RPGs remained a serious threat. "Johnson, take us straight up the main approach. Full speed, no deviation." "Ma'am, that's going to put us right in the middle of their kill zone," her driver warned. Sarah keyed the internal communications. "Gentlemen, those SEALs have been fighting for over an hour with no support. They've held their position and provided us targeting information while we approached. Now it's our turn to take some risks for them." Torres nodded grimly and selected a high-explosive round for the main gun. "Roger that, Lieutenant. Let's go get our boys." The 70-ton Abrams tank accelerated toward Hill 847, its massive bulk crushing everything in its path as it approached the final phase of the rescue mission. Sarah could see the clustered heat signatures of the insurgent force directly ahead, positioned between her tank and the trapped SEAL team. In 30 seconds, they would be in the middle of the largest firefight any of them had ever experienced. The Iron Lady climbed the rocky slope toward the SEAL team's position, with Johnson expertly navigating between boulders and steep terrain that would challenge most vehicles. The tank's tracks found purchase on surfaces that seemed impossible, testament to both the machine's engineering and the driver's skill. Sarah could now see the SEAL team's defensive position clearly through her commander's periscope. 4 figures were visible behind a cluster of large rocks, with 2 others lying motionless nearby. The wounded SEALs were being tended by their teammates, who continued to scan for threats even while providing medical aid. "Neptune 6, Iron Lady," she called on the radio. "We're approaching your position from the southwest. Prepare to move your wounded to our location." Harrison's voice was strained but professional. "Iron Lady, We're ready to move, but we'll need covering fire. The new hostile force is positioning on the high ground above us. Estimate they'll have clear shots at anyone moving in the open. Torres was already engaging targets on the ridgeline above them, using the coaxial machine gun to suppress insurgent positions and force the enemy fighters to keep their heads down. The .50 caliber rounds sparked off rocks and sent up clouds of dust wherever they impacted. The tank reached a position approximately 50 meters below the SEAL team's rocky outcropping, as close as the terrain would allow. Sarah made a tactical assessment of their situation. The Abrams could provide excellent covering fire from this position, but extracting the wounded would require the SEALs to expose themselves while moving across open ground. Kim, Torres, 1. You needs to go outside and help move those wounded, Sarah announced over the internal communications. Both crew members volunteered immediately, but Torres was needed on the main gun to provide covering fire. Kim began preparing to leave, the tank checking his personal weapons and body armor. "Lieutenant, I should be the one to go," Johnson said from the driver's position. Kim's needed to keep the main gun loaded. Sarah realized he was right. In a prolonged firefight, ammunition resupply for the main gun would be critical. Johnson, prepare to dismount. Kim, you're now our driver if we need to move quickly. The sound of incoming fire increased dramatically as the reinforcing insurgent force reached positions with clear lines of sight to both the tank and the SEAL team. Bullets pinged off the Abrams armor while RPGs began impacting nearby, sending up geysers of dirt and rock fragments. Torres traversed the main gun toward the largest concentration of muzzle flashes and fired a high-explosive round into a cluster of enemy positions. The blast temporarily silenced several weapons, but return fire resumed within seconds as other fighters took over. Sarah opened her commander's hatch slightly and shouted toward the SEAL position, "We're coming to get you. Prepare to move your wounded," Harrison acknowledged with a hand signal, then began coordinating his team's movement. Sarah watched as 2 SEALs prepared to carry their wounded teammates while the others provided security. Johnson opened the driver's hatch and slipped out of the tank, immediately drawing fire from multiple positions. He sprinted toward the SEAL team's position in a zigzag pattern, using his training to make himself a difficult target, while Sarah directed Torres to suppress the most dangerous threats. The SEAL team's sniper, Viper 1, was still operational and providing precise counter-sniper fire against insurgents on the high ground. Each carefully placed shot eliminated threats that were targeting either Johnson or the tank, demonstrating the exceptional marksmanship skills that made SEAL snipers legendary. Johnson reached the rocky outcropping and immediately began assessing the wounded SEALs. One had suffered a gunshot wound to the leg but was conscious and alert. The other had taken shrapnel from an explosion and was in more serious condition, drifting in and out of consciousness. "We can move the first casualty immediately," Johnson reported over the radio. "The second one needs a stretcher or will risk making his injuries worse." Sarah looked around the tank's interior and spotted an equipment tarp that could be used as an improvised stretcher. "Kim, get that tarp ready. We're going to have to make multiple trips." The firefight intensified as more insurgent forces moved into position. Sarah realized they were facing a coordinated assault by a much larger force than initially estimated. The enemy fighters were using classic tactics. Fix the Americans in place with suppressive fire, while maneuvering flanking elements into position for a decisive attack. Torres fired the main gun repeatedly, targeting groups of fighters as they attempted to move between positions. Each 120mm round eliminated multiple threats, but the insurgents kept coming, seemingly willing to accept heavy casualties to achieve their objective. "Neptune 6, we need to move now," Sarah called on the radio. "We're getting flanked on multiple sides." Harrison coordinated the first evacuation, with 2 SEALs carrying their wounded teammate while Johnson provided close security. The group moved quickly across the open ground toward the tank, drawing heavy fire that Torres and Viper 1 worked to suppress. Bullets whined past the moving group as they covered the 50 meters to the tank. Johnson helped load the wounded SEAL through the driver's hatch while the other SEALs took defensive positions around the Abrams, adding their firepower to the tank's defensive capabilities. But the second wounded SEAL still needed to be evacuated, and the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah could see insurgent forces moving to surround their position, cutting off potential escape routes back toward the base. "Johnson, get back to your driving position," she ordered. "We're going to move the tank closer to extract the remaining casualties." The Iron Lady lurched forward, climbing higher up the rocky slope, despite the extremely dangerous terrain. Kim had taken over driving duties and was doing his best to match Johnson's skill, but the tank scraped against rocks and struggled for traction on the steep incline. They reached a position just 20 meters from the remaining SEAL team members, close enough that the tank's bulk provided some protection from enemy fire. Harrison and his remaining operative quickly loaded their critically wounded teammate through the tank's rear escape hatch. "All personnel aboard," Harrison reported. "But we've got a problem. The route we came up is now covered by at least 3 RPG teams. They're positioned to hit us as soon as we start moving downhill." Sarah assessed their situation through her commander's periscope. The insurgent forces had indeed positioned themselves to control the tank's most likely escape route, turning their rescue into a potential trap. She keyed the radio to base operations. "Chapman Base, Iron Lady. We have successfully extracted friendly personnel but are now surrounded by large hostile force. Request immediate air support and artillery. Fire missions." The response was immediate but devastating. "Iron Lady, air support remains unavailable. Artillery support is being coordinated, but will require 20 minutes for fire mission approval and execution." 20 minutes was far longer than they could hold their current position against a determined assault by 50 or more insurgent fighters. Sarah realized they would have to fight their way out using only the tank's weapons and the additional firepower provided by the SEAL team. She looked around at her expanded crew, now including 6 SEAL team members crammed into spaces, designed for 4 tank crew members. Everyone was looking at her, waiting for the orders that would either get them home safely or lead them into their final battle. Sarah keyed the internal communications. "Gentlemen, we're surrounded and outnumbered, but we've got the best tank in the world and some of America's finest warriors. We're going to shoot our way out of here."